All right, everybody. So happy Monday. Thank you for joining us here today. Thanks for wanting to learn more about how to reduce air pollution in Colorado, about the air toxics rulemaking, and about what you can do to help. So first things first, I'll introduce the Colorado Language Co-op because today we're going to be practicing language justice.
Thank you very much, Manu. Hi, everyone. Hola a todos, a todas y a todos. My name is Valentina, and I'm here on behalf of the Community Language Cooperative, and I am here to provide and guarantee your commitment to language justice. Language justice is a type of simultaneous interpretation that seeks to create spaces in which no one language is dominant, spaces in which everyone can participate in the language of their heart. So to achieve this objective, we will be using Zoom's interpretation feature. And what you will see in a couple of minutes is that a new little button that looks like a globe will appear on the bottom bar of your screen. On that same bar where you currently have the buttons for the microphone, for the video, for the chat, etc. It'll be towards your right hand. Once you see this new little button come up, go ahead and click on it and select either English or Spanish as both the language that you will be listening into and speaking into. If you are joining the meeting on a phone or on a tablet, you will find the same options for interpretation by clicking on the button with the three little dots on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. This button reads More. Everyone must select a language channel. Only those of you that are fully bilingual can choose to ignore the service. Hola nuevamente, mi nombre es Valentina y estoy aquí por parte de Community Language Cooperative y estoy aquí para ofrecerles y garantizar su compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje. La justicia del lenguaje es un tipo de interpretación simultánea que busca crear espacios en los que no dominen ningún idioma, espacios en los que todos puedan participar en el idioma de su corazón. Para lograr este objetivo vamos a utilizar la función de interpretación de Zoom. Lo que verán en un par de minutitos es que aparecerá un nuevo botón que parece un globo terráqueo en la barra inferior de su pantalla, en la misma barra donde ahorita tienen los botones para el micrófono, para el video, para el chat, etcétera. Una vez que aparezca este nuevo botoncito que parece un globo terráqueo, haga clic en él y seleccione inglés o español como el idioma en el que desea escuchar y participar. Si usted está en esta sesión por medio de una tableta o de un teléfono, encontrará las mismas opciones para la interpretación haciendo clic en el botón que tiene tres puntitos en la esquina inferior derecha de su pantalla. Ese botoncito dice More o Más. A quick reminder for those of you that do prefer to use English during this meeting, Spanish is 20 to 25% longer than English, so please be aware of your speed. If you have any questions or any issues whatsoever with this technology, please let the whole group know by means of the chat box so that we can work together to address them. Un breve recordatorio es que la interpretación es simultánea, entonces cuando participe mantenga un ritmo de conversación. Si tiene alguna pregunta o algún problema para con esta tecnología, por favor comuníquese al grupo completo a través del chat. Muchas gracias por tenerme por acá. Vamos a activar la interpretación ahora. Thank you so much for having me here. We can go ahead and start the interpretation channels now.
Thank you so much, Valentina. And just for everybody, this will be recorded. So just for you to know, you'll be presented with a lot of information. The slides will be wordy. So I suggest you pay attention to what folks are saying. If any questions come up, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will be keeping track of those and then going back and answering them towards the end at a Q&A section of this presentation. Today, what we'll be learning about is air pollution in Colorado. We're going to be understanding the rulemaking process. We're going to recognize the impacts of air toxics, and we're going to learn how to take actions to advocate for cleaner air in the state of Colorado. Next slide, please. Now, first and foremost, I'd like to thank all the partners for this presentation, Conservation Colorado for hosting. We have Moms Clean Air Force, Healthy Water and Air Colorado, Adams County, Green Latinos, Black Parents United Foundation, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Cultivando. We couldn't have made this happen without the work of everybody contributing. And next slide, please. So today you'll be hearing from me. I am an impacted community member. My name is Manuel Marquez, and I work for Cultivando. And then you'll also be hearing from Dr. Taya Stockman, PhD from Adams County, Dr. Maria from Healthy Air and Water, Colorado, Rachel Lemon, Patricia Garcia Nelson, and Shayna Oliver. Now, I'd like to hand it off to our first esteemed speaker, Dr. Taya Stockman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Taya Stockman, and I'm the Air Quality Policy and Program Specialist for Adams County. I have a PhD in Environmental Engineering from CU Boulder, and I've been participating in these rulemakings extensively for over a year now, all related to the air toxics rulemakings. So I will be specifically talking first about some of the broader control strategies that that the Air Pollution Control Division is recommending for this Regulation 30 air toxics meeting in April. And then later on, we will be talking about some of the gaps, specifically after other speakers talk about some of the health impacts and other things. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what's happening here. All of this is about House Bill 22-1244, which was a bill passed in 2022 about air toxics in Colorado. So about 26 other states in the country have air toxics regulations, and Colorado is now joining them to include air toxics regulations here through the regulations at the Air Quality Control Commission. So this is a commission of 9 elected officials by the governor who make decisions about regulations in Colorado that impact industrial sources. So this is not talking about all the different sources of these air toxics in Colorado, but really focusing on 5 air toxics that were adopted last January, and then the control strategies for those 5 air toxics. So just a little history background for this bill and these regulations. The bill was adopted in 2022, and then the selection of 5 priority air toxics happened in January of 2025. In September of last year, Colorado adopted health-based standards for these air toxics. And then now, at April of this year, we are talking about the control strategies that industries must use for these 5 priority air toxics. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background for the selection of the 5 priority air toxics. The Colorado Air Pollution Control Division has a list of over 400 air toxics. However, we're only talking about 5, which became the top priority based on a rulemaking last January, where these 5 air toxics have the highest potential impact to Coloradans across the state, including cancer risk and non-cancer health impacts. They prioritized air toxics with a cancer risk greater than 100 cases per million and a hazard quotient above 1. So this is just talking about the health-based standards from last year. And then really all of these were ranked according to the health impact. They gathered a whole bunch of feedback, and because of the many partners on this call, 2 air toxics, including benzene and hydrogen sulfide, were added to the list of air toxics in Colorado in January of 2025. So now we want to keep the momentum going and make sure that these air pollutants are also controlled well across the state. Next slide, please. So these are the list of the 5 air toxics. So we're not talking about over 400, but we're talking about these 5 in this rulemaking. So the first one is formaldehyde. It causes cancer, but then it also, what are the sources? Oil and gas operations and large industrial engines are what is the focus for this rulemaking. Hydrogen sulfide is the second one. So this can also be caused by oil and gas refining, landfills, sewage. Hydrogen sulfide has a very distinct sulfury smell. So if you ever smell something that smells like rotten eggs, like that really odorous smell near water treatment plants, that is caused by hydrogen sulfide. It is caused by the breakdown of all the bacteria and stuff. So that's the cause of hydrogen sulfide in many of these facilities and these processes. The next one is ethylene oxide, which is really good at killing stuff. So one thing that also makes it toxic is that it's really good at killing stuff, which is then used for sterilization of medical equipment. So there's a few facilities in Colorado that sterilize medical equipment that emit a lot of ethylene oxide because that's what they're using to sterilize this equipment. Also, if you can think of, like, for instance, brewing companies have to sterilize their bottles really well before they can fill it with alcohol. Otherwise, you could end up with some bad stuff on the other side, getting infections from drinking these tainted liquids. Chromium compounds, specifically hexavalent 6. Chromium is on this list. It includes sources from metal finishing facilities, oil refineries, power plants, and coal-fired power plants especially. This rulemaking really focuses on decorative chrome. Very fancy cars have these decorative chrome plating to make them look really cool. Colorado is cracking down on those because while it looks really cool, it is hexavalent chromium and ethylene oxide are some of the most toxic compounds on this list. And then finally, benzene. So benzene is mostly produced from combustion sources, very similar to formaldehyde. So anytime you burn something, including oil and gas operations, vehicle exhaust, and other industrial manufacturing, you're going to be emitting benzene into the air. Next slide, please. So I wanted to touch on the control strategies that the Air Pollution Control Division is recommending for each of these air toxics. So hexavalent chromium, the big thing that they are recommending is banning new sources of decorative chrome plating and requiring control for current chrome plating facilities. So that's talking about very fancy cars, the very shiny, almost like mirror-like finish on bumpers for cars, that chrome plating. They're going to have a lot of controls required for existing facilities, and they are banning any future facilities coming to Colorado. For benzene, the one control they have is requiring the Suncor oil refinery to improve its leak detection and repair program. So Suncor is currently required to identify leaks above 10,000 ppm, so that's parts per million, very, very high concentrations, and then fix these leaks from various parts of their facility. The control strategy recommended by the division is to decrease this threshold to be 2,000 ppm or 500 ppm, depending on the specific type of joint or facet that is in the facility. So it's a very large reduction in their thresholds for this leak detection and repair to hopefully have Suncor have to repair more of all of the leaks that happen on the facility. Next slide, please. So further control strategies for formaldehyde. They're planning to control emissions from large industrial engines. There are approximately 200 or so facilities across Colorado that have these massive engines that are used for a variety of things, including oil and gas and utilities. So formaldehyde can be emitted from these. And the main thing they're doing is looking at the emission factors. So how much formaldehyde can be emitted per unit of energy that this big industrial engine creates, and making sure to limit that above certain thresholds. The next one is hydrogen sulfide. So they are potentially requiring wastewater treatment plants to provide reports about their emission processes to better define how they may report these to reduce these emissions in the future. And then they're also requiring one asphalt facility to implement controls that they are already doing, but saying that this would also apply to future asphalt facilities as well, to have similar control technologies on their facilities. And then specifically, ethylene oxide, they are implementing federal regulations for medical sterilization. So in 2024, the federal government under the Biden administration created a regulation about ethylene oxide. The current administration is pulling back all of those regulations for ethylene oxide for medical sterilizing. And what the state of Colorado is doing is saying, no, in Colorado, we are using that standard that the federal government created in 2024, and we do not want any rollbacks to any equipment and any of these sterilization facilities in Colorado. Next slide, please. So with that, I will pass it off to Dr. Maria Chansky to talk more about the health impacts of um, of these various pollutants. And later on, we'll talk about the gaps of, what things could the division still be doing to make this regulation stronger.
Hi, my name is Maria Chansky. I'm a family doc from Western Colorado over on the western side of the state in Glenwood Springs. And I do have a special interest in climate medicine. I'm currently working on a master's degree in climate medicine and public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So kind of exploring the ways in which climate change impacts our health. And so this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And I wanted to thank everybody for being here. These are really important topics, and I'm really glad that everybody's here to chat about these things. Next slide, please. So I wanted to, first of all, address how much of a problem is this, because Colorado is known for pristine wilderness and fresh mountain air. We have a lot of tourists that come to visit our state because of the environment. We have a lot of people that moved to Colorado because of the environment. So how big of a problem is this? This chart shows the air quality grades that were given to 22 Colorado counties by the American Lung Association last year on their State of the Air report card. This report card grades air quality, particularly based on the number of high or unsafe ozone days, but it does take other factors into consideration, including the toxic air contaminants. There are 64 counties in Colorado. Only 22 of them provided enough data to actually grade them, and 14 of the counties that provided data actually failed as far as air quality. So this just indicates that air quality in Colorado is actually a very significant problem. Next slide, please. So I want to just take a minute to go through each of the toxic air contaminants and briefly describe the specific cancerous and non-cancerous health issues that they cause. First up is formaldehyde. And as far as non-cancerous impacts, formaldehyde is known to cause irritation of the eyes, nose, throat, airways, and skin. As far as cancer issues, there's an increased risk of leukemia death among workers who are regularly exposed to formaldehyde. Next slide, please. Next up is hydrogen sulfide, and that has a variety of cancerous and non-cancerous health issues. This is considered a broad spectrum toxicant. Toxic means bad, so this has a lot of negative impacts on the health. It tends to particularly affect the mucous membranes, which are the membranes inside the eyelid, inside the nose, inside the mouth, so the pinkish moisture kind of membranes. And it also is particularly harmful to organs that demand a lot of oxygen, such as the heart and the brain. So really, really important organs. It can cause a lot of neurological impacts. It can cause confusion. It can cause memory problems. It can cause headaches, cause hallucinations, cause significant mental status changes. It can also impact the heart. It can drop the blood pressure to dangerously low levels and put severe stress on the heart. It can impact the gut, cause problems with digestion, and it can, in severe cases, lead to respiratory distress, failure of the lungs and heart, and death. Next slide, please. Ethylene oxide has a number of issues, both on cancers and on reproductive health. As far as cancer risks, it increases the risk of leukemia, lymphoma, and breast cancer. It also can increase the risk of miscarriages, so it has significant impacts for both community members and female employees who are exposed to the ethylene oxide. If you look at, they've done studies looking at the risk of cancers to people who work in facilities with high ethylene oxide productions, the sterilization facilities and other areas where there's a lot of ethylene oxide exposure. And of all the people who work in these areas, if they have a 35-year work history, there's 1 in 17 of them are likely to end up with a cancer. Next slide, please. Hexavalent chromium causes significant respiratory impacts. It can cause or exacerbate asthma. It can cause lung damage. It can cause ulcerations in the respiratory passageways, including the nose. It can cause sensory damage to the eyes. It can cause conjunctivitis, which is very unpleasant and can risk the vision. It can lead to ruptured eardrums. It can also lead to dental decay and dental damage. As far as internal effects, it can cause chronic abdominal pain and can cause kidney and liver disease. It can also increase the risks of lung, nasal, and sinus cancers. Next slide, please.
Before I advance the slide, are you able to slow down a little bit? This is very technical language, so we need a little bit more time for the interpretation.
Of course, I'm sorry. As far as benzene health impacts, benzene can significantly impact the risk of leukemia, which is a blood cancer. It can cause other blood disorders, such as anemia, which is a low blood count, and can impact the platelets, which is the part of the body, the part of the blood that helps us to clot when we have an injury or a wound, and it can cause problems with that clotting, leading to bleeding tendencies. It can also cause problems in the white blood cells, which is the part of your blood that fights off germs, leading to a weakened immune system. It can lead to reproductive problems, including low birth weight and problems with bone marrow development in the babies. Bone marrow is where the blood is made. So if there's bone marrow problems, then babies have problems making blood, and that can lead to the health issues such as the clotting problems and the immune system problems. Next slide, please. So in addition to these immediate health impacts, there are also a lot of long-term repercussions of these toxic air contaminants. So a lot of secondary impacts on health. 3 of these toxic air contaminants, including benzene, ethylene oxide, and formaldehyde, are also considered volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. VOCs are significant because they react with emissions from gas cars. And when there's lots of gas cars on the roads and VOCs in the atmosphere, particularly when they're heated by sunlight in the summer, they produce a lot of ozone, which is basically smog. I'm sure you've all appreciated the haziness of the Denver skyline on a bad smog day. In addition to being something that we see, it also is something that impacts our health. Ozone itself has significant health impacts, including coughing and irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat. Severe impacts of ozone may include chest pain, breathing trouble, asthma attacks, exacerbations of chronic lung and heart disease, and even premature death. The bottom line is that the higher levels of the toxic air contaminants leads to higher levels of ozone, which leads to more common and more severe health problems. Next slide, please. There are a number of health problems that are associated with ozone, and I just wanted to talk about them for a minute. There is a significantly higher risk of heart attacks and strokes 4 to 5 days after a high ozone bad air quality day. So the emergency rooms and the hospitals see the fallout of ozone about 4 or 5 days after a bad ozone day. For every 1% increase in ozone, there's a 1% increase in cardiac arrests, which is when the heart stops in outpatient setting. So these are in our communities, at the gym, at the movie theater, in the restaurants, at home. Every 1% increase in ozone leads to 1% increase in cardiac arrests in the community. For 40 days in the summer of 2024, the Northern Front Range counties exceeded the EPA ozone standards at a harmful level, and air quality in the state of Colorado has deteriorated to the point that in 2022, the EPA reclassified the Denver metro area, including the North Front Range, as a severe non-attainment area under 2008 ozone standards. Next slide, please. One other long-term impact of these toxic air contaminants is heat. Ozone in the lower levels of the atmosphere acts like a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases are gases that prevent heat from being emitted from the planet, and this directly contributes to global warming. In addition to the ozone, formaldehyde, which is one of our 5 toxic air contaminants, specifically reacts in the atmosphere to form other compounds that have climate impacts. The Colorado Climate Report indicated that the average temperature in Colorado has risen almost 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since 1980. And if global temperatures rise by approximately 4 degrees Fahrenheit, or local temperatures for our purposes, the annual number of heat-related deaths may increase fivefold, which means 5 times as many people may be passing from heat-related deaths. Heat stress can exacerbate underlying illnesses such as cardiovascular disease, disease of the heart and lungs, diabetes, mental health problems like depression, asthma, and kidney disease. It can also make people more sensitive to side effects from specific medications. So some medications become much more hazardous in the context of extreme heat. Deaths from heart attacks and strokes, even at this point, tend to be 2 to 3 times more likely in the context of extreme heat. Increasing temperatures are also associated with higher risks of accidents, increased risk of air pollution, more food insecurity, and higher transmission of some infections that are heat dependent. At particular risk are pregnant women, young children, elderly adults, people with underlying health conditions, overweight and obese individuals, and outdoor workers. The U.S. Bureau of Labor notes that across the U.S., almost 33% of employees have regular outdoor exposure as part of their work, which puts them at particularly high risk from extreme heat. In Colorado, this would include people who work in farming, ranching, oil and gas industries, building and outdoor recreation, landscaping. These are all people who are significantly higher risk. And these are industries that are really important to the state of Colorado and includes jobs that are held by many of us and many of our family members. Next slide, please. I wanted to chat for a minute about which communities in Colorado are at the highest risk from these toxic air contaminants. The people who are at particularly high risk are people who are living within a mile of a gas or oil drilling or processing facility or another source of these toxic air contaminants. If you look at this map, the little black dots are the oil and gas facilities. The yellow surrounding areas are called the threat radius, which is the geographic regions within 1 mile of the gas and oil facilities and the highest risk areas. And the color of the counties represents the air quality concerns, with darker color representing worse air quality. You can see that the 3 worst air regions in the darker red and circled by black by far include the Denver-Boulder corridor, a large patch in the western part of the state, which happens to be my home, and the southwest corner of the state. These are areas that have poorer air quality and contain a significant amount of the black dots and the yellow threat radius. There are 50,600 oil and gas facilities in this area, and there are estimated between 288,000 to 378,000 people who live in this threat radius, and that includes 39,000 students and 75,000 persons of color. So these are our neighbors and our community members who are particularly high risk. I did want to just kind of summarize who's at higher risk from all of these health issues. This includes seniors, children, people with lung conditions, people with heart disease, pregnant folks, oil and gas workers, outdoor workers, and people who live within 1 mile of these emitting facilities. Next, sorry, I missed the next slide, but next slide after that, please. That's just a summary of who's at particular risk. And then next slide, please. So I did want to chat for a minute about what each of us can do to help with this problem. First of all, although none of us are high emitters of the toxic air contaminants, there's a lot of things that's within our power to do that can help the problem, as far as minimizing the production of ozone. Decreasing the emissions from our cars is helpful. So reducing driving on hot days is really important. Using a carpool or using a bus are very good alternatives to riding a bicycle, a good way to get exercise and reduce the car emissions. And that directly lowers the amount of ozone that is created secondary to the toxic air contaminants, and also limits the amount of heat that we're generating through the greenhouse gases. So that's really important. Composting is important. If there's less organic trash going into the landfill, that also reduces the emissions. So it is one way that we can reduce emissions on a house-to-house basis. Conserving energy, minimize your electricity use at home so there's less demand on coal-fired power plants. Simple things like turning off lights and TVs when you leave a room actually do make a difference. What you do with your energy and your voice is important. So advocating for air quality monitoring is and reporting on of bad air quality days is critical. Being mindful of health problems that are impacted by poor air quality and reporting them to the public health department is really significant. It's much easier to track and analyze community impacts when we have the appropriate data. So being in touch with the public health departments is really important. Really truly seek emergent medical care if you're having breathing problems, if you are having chest pain, anything that is more of a significant health issue, mental status changes, go to the emergency department. Health problems that are caused by exposures to these toxics get worse with time. Just speaking from a medical point of view, it's much easier to take care of patients and health problems if we catch the problems earlier when they're milder. And again, chest pain, shortness of breath, severe dehydration, mental status changes are medical emergencies. Next slide, please. And with this, I will pass it on to Ms. Rachel for the next part of our talk.
Hi, y'all. So I'm going to sort of figure out and give you some context for what the disproportionately impacted community, that terminology means. We say it a lot, and I don't think that a lot of people know where that comes from or how it's used, and in particular, how it's used by CDPHE. The redlining, it comes from redlining. So redlining is the practice of denying people access to credit because of where they live, even if they are personally qualified for loans. Historically, urban neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods in particular were definitely overly monitored as far as like where they could live and where they couldn't live, and the banks used this to make sure that we kept people separate. This resulted in segregation that was institutionally maintained. They were underinvested areas, resulting in really reduced property values. If these areas weren't gentrified, and we know that happens too, that some neighborhoods are very low property values and they redevelop them and turn them into something else. I live over here in the north side, and now they call it the Highlands because it's been gentrified. So that's just an example for you. Um, in it, so industry, if they weren't gentrified, they had industry move in, lots of industry. And highways cut through these communities as well because they weren't seen as valuable as other properties. So I-70, for example, was an example of a highway cutting through a community, bifurcating it, and really decimating a lot of the local businesses that were around that area. So when we say DIC, or disproportionately impacted community, we actually mean people living in an industrially harmed area. So CDPHE uses this tool called the EnviroScreen. As Dr. Chomsky already discussed, there's a lot of different groups that are affected and have a lot more sensitivity to these toxins. And so this slide basically tells you what exactly the metrics are to qualify as a disproportionately impacted community. So 40% or more of low-income families, 40% or more of people of color, 50% of households spend more than 30% of income to pay for housing. 20% or more households where all adults speak a language other than English. Environmentally and socioeconomically burdened by pollution, health factors, and income. Southern Ute and Ute Mountain tribal lands. Mobile home neighborhoods, and historically marginalized neighborhoods. So this kind of speaks to vast range of ethnic and race groups. Um, and so, yes, as somebody put in the message, it's not all of these. It's one of these or several or combination of them. So this is what we mean when we're talking about disproportionately and impacted communities. And you're going to hear this talked about a lot throughout the rest of the the webinar. And I'm pleased to bring in my colleague, Patricia Garcia Nelson from Green Latinos.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for the introduction. Um, I am here to share my story about the work that's been happening in Colorado. I'm looking at the chat and I see a lot of questions that I had when I first started working in the environmental justice space. And at the time when all of this started for me was almost 10 years ago. Um, and I was just living my normal life. I had just moved back from Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is also basically think of it where all of the oil and gas that is produced in this area eventually ends up. Um, and so I lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I remember driving on a bridge in 2012, and you could see over the city, and there's just a thick cloud of just dirt. And I was thinking, there's no way I could raise my kid here. So then, before my son was born, I decided I wanted to move back to Colorado because I wanted him to live, to have the childhood I did. We played outside all the time. No one worried about the air. We had blue skies. And so ultimately, in October of 2016, I moved back to Colorado. And it was in the beginning of March of 2017 where I attended the meeting where I learned that the state of Colorado had just approved permits for a 24 well oil and gas site to be built. At the time, it was 1,200 and some it was just about 1,300 feet from the school. And I thought, there's no way that they could build this because in Colorado, you can't have a wheat store within 1,000 feet of a school. So there's no way that they're gonna allow this company to build an industrial site. And so that evening, I joined a lawsuit against the state of Colorado for the approval of the permits because I thought this couldn't happen. That turned into 4 years of litigation where initially we thought everything was lost. But after filing appeals and almost going to the Supreme Court of Colorado, we were able to establish a legal precedent that allowed community groups to sue the government for approving permits like the one that had happened. So since then, there have been some other community groups that have sued for the approval of the permits near their homes. And we have been able to change the laws in Colorado so that a lot of these projects are not happening so close to homes and schools. But that doesn't mean that they are no longer building oil and gas sites close to schools. I still live in Greeley. I live on what's considered the really nice part of town, and less than a mile from my home, there's another middle school. And just 3,000 feet from that school, they have just finished building an 18 well oil and gas site. This is a site that I've been monitoring since I live near it. And there are regulations in Colorado that require oil and gas companies to have air monitors in place during the construction of a site. And so just driving by, I noticed that they were not exactly following the rules around the placement of the air monitors. So, like I said, we have made a lot of progress over the years, but we are absolutely nowhere near getting the work done. Um, since I've started working in the movement, I used to work as an accountant for different construction companies, and now I work for Green Latinos. Sorry, I have something in my eye. I work for Green Latinos. We're a nationwide organization, but my work primarily is here in Colorado. And I've worked with a lot of the organizations that are partnering with us today to bring this information for everyone. And I'm sharing my story because we're almost to the 10th anniversary of the approval of the wells at my son's school, but we're still in the same position where we're trying to make sure that the protections that we're asking for are implemented in a manner that is actually going to help our communities. And so I'm very grateful for everybody joining. And I'm hoping that after you leave here today, you can think of what is your reason to be here tonight? What is your reason to want to do something? And I'm very privileged to be able to share my reason why I'm here tonight. So I'll pass it back to Dr. Taya. Oops, too far.
Hi, everyone. So now that we've learned a little bit more about the health impacts and why this is so important to Coloradans, I did want to touch on some of the gaps that all of our organizations are seeing in the current regulations that you on this call might want to help advocate for. So, one thing that you've probably noticed is when we're talking about benzene and formaldehyde, oil and gas industrial sources are large contributors and polluters of benzene and formaldehyde in Colorado. However, there are no control strategies for oil and gas in this regulation. So there's large sources of these air toxics that are not being covered. Another large source of air toxics that are not being covered are hydrogen sulfide sources. So I said in this rule, there's one facility that emits hydrogen sulfide that is already doing regulations, is already doing controls, that's going to be roped into this regulation as, oh, you're doing a good job, but there's no other sources of hydrogen sulfide that are very close to community members that are really being regulated, such as wastewater treatment facilities or the Suncor oil refinery. And then we're also very concerned about the potential for emissions being grandfathered in. So what they're doing is they're saying if you've emitted a certain amount of pollution, if you meet a certain threshold of pollutant levels for 2023, 2024, or 2025, you're required to do the control strategies that are required by the regulation. However, let's say that you emit a little bit more next year compared to this year, and you just keep increasing your emissions, you would not be required to implement these control strategies. So we really want to make sure that all existing sources that meet the thresholds and everything they should be required to reduce their pollution just like anyone else. And then finally, I wanted to just talk more about what Rachel talked about earlier, which is disproportionately impacted communities. These are communities that have a lot more potential sources of air toxics, and we want to make sure that the sources near where people live and near the boundaries of these disproportionately impacted communities are being accounted for. So in current regulations, you could have a source literally across the street from your community, but if it's not in the imaginary census block group boundary, this source does not have to be regulated. So we want to make sure that sources that are near communities are actually being regulated just like any other source, because that's what people breathe in. And with that, I will turn it to Shayna, who will be talking about how to provide public comment and making it as the least scary as possible, and all the different ways you can provide public comment at a rulemaking.
Thank you, Taya, for bringing us in and why we are all here. And based on the Regulation 30 rulemaking that the Air Quality Control Commission are currently working on. Again, my name is Shayna Oliver. I am a tribal member of the Navajo Nation from Shiprock, New Mexico. I advocate for Indigenous peoples' rights. I joined Moms Clean Air Force as a volunteer back in 2016. In 2015, what got me to advocate around environmental issues was an incident that happened in southern Colorado in 2015 when the EPA was digging around sites that were not remediated and they weren't cleaned up, and it was pertaining to a toxic mine spill, which the EPA were potentially trying to clean up without the community's knowledge. And what happened during that time is that the Animas and San Juan rivers were contaminated, which is a big source of water source for the Navajo Nation, which, as I just mentioned, I'm an enrolled member. So I have family that are, impacted by what was caused by that. And so many other communities from the Four Corners onwards were impacted because of that spill that ended up in those waters. So that disaster really changed my perspective on how to advocate for community and what it means to advocate in Colorado and how that protects other communities, and as well as the tribal communities that are supported by the Colorado River, that we all we're all in use of. So that really has changed the way I look at environmental justice and how I advocate. And right now I work with Moms Clean Air Force. I started after I've been volunteering on these environmental issues. Now I advocate for environmental justice and tribal sovereignty as an advocate, and working on these issues with Moms Clean Air Force, where we focus on clean air policy. And I live here with my family. I have 4 kids, and we're a family of 6, and we're in the Denver area. We live 5 miles from Suncor. We're not too far from major highways. So those components impact our air quality, as what's known to the American Lung Association, that we do have the worst air quality for ozone pollution, where we continue to sit at the 6th worst communities for bad air quality for ozone pollution, which stems from many sources of existing sources that Teo was just mentioning, as well as Dr. Maria had went over as well. And we can go to the next slide. And again, like Moms Clean Air Force, we are a national organization of over 1.5 or 1.6 million moms, parents, caregivers, dads that are united for fighting for our children's right, their health and safety against air pollution and the climate change pollution. So we are, uplifting our voices as community members, but importantly as parents, because normally parents are not able to take action in these spaces because we're at work. We're taking care of family, and some of us have double shifts or three shifts for some families. And Colorado is no exception to that. So we want to be mindful to our community members and know why we're doing this. This is one rulemaking out of many. So we can go to the next slide. So the importance of making your voice heard by the AQCC, which means the Air Quality Control Commission, which is a state-appointed body that oversees air quality programs, adopts regulations, and promotes clean air and greenhouse gas reduction statewide. Why do they need to hear from us, me, you? Air, the Air Quality Control Commission public comment periods are a great way for commissioners to hear directly from community members, everyday people. And if you're able to take a day off or take time off to make your voice heard, or there's many other ways to communicate with the commissioners. So this opportunity is, it's really, one in the once in a lifetime public comment right now, because a lot of these public comments that we're making on these rulemakings were an effort of like this 10-year period where we've been, the state approved that climate change reduction pollution, which is a state law, which has amplified the environmental justice rulemaking 1244. That rulemaking actually prompt these different rulemakings that are happening around these toxic facilities that are emitting toxic climate pollution emissions into our state. So these are like many many rulemakings that we had to get here. So there's been many other rulemakings at the same time that we've been fighting for, and that are a part of these climate policies that we passed within the last 10 years. So this is ongoing. Because a state law becomes law doesn't mean it actually starts working. And once it becomes law, we have to go through the state's process of through these rulemakings that are now in the hands of the Colorado Public Health and Environment departments, and to different commissions like the Air Quality Control Commission. And we also have the Air Pollution Control Commission. And we also have the newly reinvented Oil and Gas Department, which is now renamed as the Energy Carbon Management Commission. So there's a lot of acronyms that we're forced to use because there's so many departments that are overseeing these environmental justice policies. So just keep in mind, this is not the only rulemaking that we can fight for, but there are plenty of other implementations that we're waiting for implementation to make those climate policies more meaningful for communities. So that's really why we need to speak to the AQCC and make our voices heard, because these are one of many reasons why we have to speak up on these air toxics. And the biggest difference you can make is speaking up for your community, your family, and how you've been impacted. For instance, since I've been living in a disproportionately impacted community all my life, especially as a tribal member. I got to see different communities and different environmental injustices, and from that, a lot of us are impacted with asthma, and also adverse birth outcomes. People that live in these communities don't really talk about or make that connection that our maternal health, our reproductive health, and the way our babies are developed and brought up into our communities. They don't get to hear that from many of the community members, and that's a great way to urge your commissioners to know why this rulemaking is important, to make it meaningful, and that we shouldn't be exempting toxic polluters. There should be no exemptions. So we can go to the next slide. So when telling your story, remember to state your name, what community affiliations you have, or organization affiliations that you have under the many hats you might be wearing. So stating your name, your neighborhood, your personal reason of why to testify, like I mentioned, asthma. In a lot of cases, a lot of our working families are also caring for a member that's either undergoing cancer treatment or, is some of our communities, our students are working a lot more in our impacted communities because they're caring for their family member that's impacted by many of these different illnesses like asthma, respiratory diseases or illnesses, and cancer or mental health. There's a lot of mental health behavioral impacts in our neighborhoods too, that also impact our communities because of these different variables that can impact us. So the benefit is to really, to share your story so that you can make change in these policies and um, push for no exemptions. Also, um, conclude with your desired outcome. What do you want them to do? You want them to support this regulation, and on top of that, there really should be no um, there should be no bypasses for toxic polluters that are harming our children's health, and um, they should be held accountable, and they have the resources to make themselves accountable. So that's what we should be pushing for as communities, to remember to not be shy of sharing your personal story, and that there are always others that are unfortunately are not able to make public comments. So we got to make sure that we can make those public comments and make sure that our community voices are heard. Because you can find information at CDPHE's website on environmental impacts, and also like the environmental screen. You can check that out on CDPHE's website. So they do have new screening. So they do have to update those websites too, according to our environmental justice task force. So check out those newly developed programs that we got CDPHE to do, and hold them accountable, because we need to make sure that all communities are protected from toxic polluters. And we can go to the next page or slide. Or is that it? Okay. All right. And then so testifying to the AQCC for Regulation 30 emission control standards. You can go to the website, which will be provided in the app as well. Once you get to the website to register at CDPHE's website under the Air Quality Control Commission's monthly meetings, we'll provide the link to register in the chat as well. But you'll be able to sign up at the website. It'll ask you for your name. You don't really need to provide your too much information other than your name and your email, and what position you're taking on the rulemaking, and if you're for, against, or to inform, are some of the options. Once you get through that registration process, you'll get a notification in your email saying that you register. Be sure to save that information into your calendar if you're able to, or cut and paste the information and save it in your calendar, so that you remember to join the hearing when it comes. If you decide to do a public comment, oral public comment, that will all oral public comments will be taken on April 15th, as well as written comments are due April 9th, a lot sooner than oral comments. And you can send your written comments directly to cdphc.acqcc@state.co.us. So that will directly send your comments to the commission. If you need help, Jazz with Conservation Colorado, or myself, I'm at soliver@momscleanairforce.org. We can help you submit your public comment, or if you need little help with your public comments, we're able to do that for you as well. and we can help you send that off to CDPHE if you're more comfortable doing written comments. Again, those are due on April 9th. But if you're more open to giving the oral public comment, you'll have until April 15th to give a 2-minute testimony. Unfortunately, they don't give us a lot of time to speak. So that's about like, to comfortably speak, you can speak about like 320 words for a 2-minute public comment. If they do allow 3 minutes, you have about like a 400 word count to speak, roughly. So those are some things to keep in mind about when giving public comment, to think about how much time you have. If you only have 2 minutes, that's not a lot of time. I understand that you won't be able to share everything you want to share in your message, but to be more direct and concise in your delivering your public comment about who you are, and how this rulemaking will impact you if if the certain concerns are not addressed, and that, or state why you want these issues addressed. And your personal story is the most powerful thing you can do in moving commissioners' votes. So we strongly urge you to participate in this public comment on these 5 toxic contaminants that the Air Quality Control Commission. For some reason, I can't say the 2 C's right now, but this Regulation 30 is just one of many rulemakings that are taking implementation. So we'll need your continued community support on watching these rulemakings as well. I know there's a lot of other important rulemakings and other important things that are happening as well. So we only ask that if you're able to provide a public comment, that it is only 2 minutes, and to give a public comment or written comments are also always welcome. And I will hand it off to our moderator. And thank you guys for joining us in this webinar.
Thank you, Shayna, and thank you to all of our panelists for all this wonderful information. And thank you to the guests and the participants who are so active in the chat. Just know that we received all of your questions and we will be following up in an email. As well, you will be receiving a community comment guide to kind of overview how to submit your comments. And then also, if you would like for us to submit it on your behalf, please direct those inquiries to one of the 2 emails that you'll find in the chat. If you did make a question, I invite you to look into the chat and see if it was answered. Most of these were, but if not, just know that we received them and we'll get back to you. I do see folks hopping off, and out of respect for everybody's time, we will be concluding. But yeah, some key takeaways from today is that you learned about the rulemaking process and how it works to improve air quality, or how it should. You learned about the 5 priority air toxics, and you learned about how your public comments help everyone, as well as what to include in them and how to submit them. So, again, thanks so much for your time this evening. Looking forward to being with you in this fight, and let's hope to pass some good regulations for these industries. Thank you, everybody. Blessings.